Tonight, over 40 million people are hungry. People are leaving their homes in search of higher ground and new jobs and new places to live, all due to climate change, and that is almost overwhelming. COP26 is about to descend on Glasgow, and we hope that decisions will be made which will bring climate justice to those who have done least to cause this climate crisis. One of our panel, Ian, says that art makes us curious and it forces us to have conversations about big issues. And I wonder if we can take Ian's thoughts and add them to those of one of my favourite people, Brené Brown. And in a big fat Ian Brené mashup, might we say that art makes us curious, brave and kind about the world around us. I wonder if it can prompt us to give, act and pray for the world around us. I am going to leave you in the more than capable hands of our chair, Shona Knox. We're going to think about how creativity can change the world, and I'll be back to see you again at the end. Shona.
Thanks, Leanne. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session. It is great to see so many people joining to hear from, as Leanne said, our fantastic contributors. My name is Shona Knox. I'm an elder at my local church in St John's in Gourock, and I was a member of Christian Aid's prophetic activist scheme. Before introducing our speakers, I'll briefly outline the aims and format of tonight's discussion and also try to set the scene about where we're at ahead of COP26. So hopefully tonight, the aims that we've got, and we hope you'll really enjoy it and get this from this event. We hope to inspire you to use your creativity as a means of activism, to explore how creativity can inspire us to change the world, and encourage you to engage with COP26 and signpost you to ways in which you can do that. The format for tonight, each of our presenters will have 10 minutes to speak about some of their work. And at the end, as we've already said, there'll be a Q&A session. So as you're hearing from our presenters, please do put some questions in the comment box for them, or any comments or thoughts that pop to your head while they're talking, and we will bring them in at the end. So in 39 days, Glasgow will welcome people from all over the world for COP26. And with such a huge focus being on Scotland, more so than ever, does it feel like climate is the topic on everyone's mind. But how is that being reflected in our lives? For those of us who care deeply about climate justice, we recognise that individual actions and behaviour changes do make a difference, but only if governments and corporations and big business change their ways on a global scale too. So when people think of activists, they often think of people who take part in demonstrations, marches, or who lobby their elected representatives. That's obviously true, and it's one way of being an activist. But as we'll hear tonight, there are many other ways we can be activists and express how we feel about subjects like climate justice. So tonight, our speakers will demonstrate how we can put our faith into action by getting creative. So our first speaker tonight, Cathy Galloway, is a former head of Christian Aid Scotland, writer and member of the Iona community. So Cathy has always combined activism and creativity, and her most recent work, Living Faithfully in a Time of Creation, is a compilation of reflections, essays and liturgy written by writers from around the world in anticipation of COP26. Next, we've got Ian Campbell, who is a Glasgow-based portrait painter and an affiliate artist of the UNESCO Chair in Refugee Integration through Languages and the Arts. His work focuses on bold portraits exploring life in the face of adversity. And between 2016 and 2019, Ian was artist in residence at St George's Tron Church of Scotland in Glasgow. Ian has also painted for Christian Aid, the World Council of Churches, Tear Fund and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Next, we'll hear from Reverend David Coleman, who is a URC minister and member of the Iona community. David is also the environmental chaplain with Eco Congregation Scotland, and his role is to encourage local churches, colleges and communities to enrich their faith through environmental prayer and action. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Anna Fisk, who's a feminist theologian and scholar of religion and a climate justice activist. As an activist, Anna has been involved with Extinction Rebellion Scotland and now at Climate Camp Scotland to take direct action against fossil fuel corporations and call for just transition for workers and communities. Anna is also a knitter, a spinner and a dyer, and has run community craft projects and workshops. So really looking forward to hear some of that tonight as well. And last but certainly not least, we've got Linda Murgatroyd, who's clerk of the Quaker Arts Network and initiated the Loving Earth project in 2019. Since retiring from a career in social research and statistics, Linda has trained in various visual arts and in spiritual direction. Her prize-winning 2010 essay, The Future of Quakers in Britain, Holding Spaces for the Spirit to Act, describes how she has used the arts in her own spiritual practice. So without further ado, I will bring in Kathy Galloway as our first contributor for this evening. Kathy.
Okay, that's me. Sorry about that. Thank you, Shona, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this really interesting meeting. And thinking about writing and my creative practice, which is part of what we were asked to do, I thought back and I realized that I can date the beginning of my writing career to when I was 13, and I started then writing songs because I was also a singer, and since that time I've written poetry, prose, and even a couple of plays back in the 1990s. I've written 12 books and edited 5, and hundreds of articles and columns and chapters and forewords and introductions and radio scripts. Sometimes I think I must have written 1 million words. I get asked to write a lot by people and groups involved in social justice activism, but I would write anyway. I write because I write, because I can't not do it. And some years ago, quite a few years ago, I came across a poem by the Scottish-French writer Kenneth White, who founded a movement called Eco-Poetics. And it struck me as the best description I had ever come across of what my practice is. And when as a writer, but also actually I realized that it's a great description of what it means to be an activist. And I recognized that actually for me, these two things are not separate. I also go on marches and demonstrations and, sign letters and things, but it's all of a piece really. So this is the poem, and I think it might be possible to screen share it. Thank you. For the question is always how, out of all the chances and changes, to select the features of real significance, so as to make of the welter a world that will last, and how to order the signs and the symbols so they will continue to form new patterns, developing into new harmonic wholes, so to keep life alive in complexity and complicity with all of being. There is only poetry. So a key for me there is the very first line in that poem, for the question is always how. And that's a great activist question. How do we select the features of real significance? How do we order the signs and symbols to keep life alive in complexity and complicity? And creative writing, I think, almost always comes from an urgency, from a deep need to express and communicate something about the human condition, or at least about our human condition, to express something we're passionate about, or some injustice we're angry about, some achievement we're delighted about, some fear that we're despairing about, or some hope, or some dream, some dread, some grief. And writing seems to open a channel or a path to memories and feelings and thoughts and ideas we didn't know we had. It's a way to explore and to clarify and to make connections with our present experience. And it gives us access to parts of ourselves that speaking or thinking alone can't do. And it can help us to express things we know or feel but find almost impossible to say aloud. And it helps us to work on things because it's there on the page outside ourselves, and you can kind of take a relationship to it and can develop it later or come back to it and reflect on it. But it also offers a lasting record of experiences and events, stages of life, journeys of faith and struggle. And the power of writing, I think, has always been recognized in political change and struggles for justice. The poet, the playwright, the journalist, and sometimes the liturgist have all been on the front line of liberation movements, for example, and are often the first to be imprisoned or otherwise silenced. And I think writers are dangerous, or can be dangerous, because they question received wisdom. They present an alternative take on truth, and they are nonconformists and dissenters. But I also think that writing can play an important part in empowerment and advocacy at a local level, because when people experience marginalization and silencing, finding their own voices again is not just an act of resistance, it's an act of insistence. It's a way of stating, you cannot continue to ignore and overlook us, we will be heard. And like all art, it says, we are alive and our lives have value. And I think it's also has much to say about the non-human world as well, the all of being, which is what we are integrally part of, and which we have heard raising its voice in a way that is becoming louder and louder and more insistent. Maybe not in words. And as Shona said, the most recent piece of writing that I've been involved in has been a book, Living Faithfully in the Time of Creation, which is published by Wild Goose Publications at ionabooks.com, and has lots of essays and biblical reflections, prayers, poems, and so on from people in different parts of the world. So I encourage you to look at it and to follow that up. And then I thought I would just finish. I think I haven't gone over my time yet, have I? I thought I would just finish by actually reading a poem that I have written, and because it's 30 years since I wrote this, and I was living in a tropical country for a while at the time. And looking back, I think it says something really important about creation and about how we engage with it and how we understand ourselves as a part of creation, and not as a species among species, and interdependent with the whole of creation. and it's really it's a poem dedicated to insects, and it's called A Different Order of Creation. Now I see skinny lizards skiting through the grass and darting geckos, naked with vulnerability of rubber bands, and tiny twitchy frogs as curious as babies. I have grown intimate with ants and carefree with cockroaches. I hear the whirring of the dragonfly above the whizzing of the fan. I have learned to apprehend mosquitoes and sat transfixed while butterflies with wings more beautiful than peacock damask visit my blue bag time and time again. A whole and complicated order of creation imposed itself upon my gaze while I sat still and drank my coffee in the garden. Or rather, I should say, I opened my eyes and saw it, opened my ears and heard it, narrowed my field and selected it. Together, we changed me. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Kathy. That was great, thank you. And next up we have Ian.
Hello. Well, it's really a treat for me coming straight after Kathy. Once upon a time, Kathy was my boss's boss. And to give you an indication of how long ago that was, I had hair. So that wasn't yesterday. I've got a little stop clock here, and I'm just pressing start on that so I don't lose track of time. So now, some of you, I spotted some names in all those wee boxes that I recognise, and there's plenty that I don't. So I know that some people will be familiar with some of the pictures I'll show you early on, but some people won't be. Here is a wee fun fact for you. According to the National Portrait Gallery, Queen Elizabeth II, who you may have heard of, is the most portrayed individual in history, and she has, believe it or not, 968 portraits that have been done of her, which is quite a thought. And I've found when you paint people's portraits, there's almost a sense in which you're kind of comparing them to the Queen, because that's kind of who people think of when you think of portraits. Because if you reached into your pocket just now and pulled out a banknote or a coin, her face would be there, kind of inescapable. So I found when I paint folks, there's an elevation of their status in people's mind, and that's something that makes people curious. It makes people want to know who is that person. Now I'm going to do that screen sharing thing that people do on Zoom, so hopefully this will work okay. Bear with me for just a wee second, and I think we're rolling. I think that looks like we are fine. Okay, so this is a painting some of you might be familiar with. I painted this a few years ago. It's in St George's, Tron, Church of Scotland, on Nelson Mandela's place. When I painted this, it's called Our Last Supper. Folks who are round the table of that, there's 13 individuals there. They're all guests of Glasgow City Mission. And St George's Tron had reopened after what people would describe as a hard reboot, and they had a partnership project with Glasgow City Mission. And I started painting this great big painting. It's 8 foot by 4 foot when they opened up the cafe in the church, and instantly people were curious. They asked 2 questions straight away. First of all, they would count the number of people around the table when they'd come in for a cuppa, and they'd say to me, "Is that the Last Supper?" And the second question was always this, and which one's Jesus? People were absolutely curious about these folks, opened up all sorts of questions with people. And that was a pilot project. We moved on to other paintings that I did. I did 24 paintings, one for each chapter of the Gospel of Luke. Not everything was as obvious as people would expect. My friend Fiona Morrison is there on the right. She offered that I could paint her when she was going through chemotherapy, and that became my chapter 12 painting, reflecting on Jesus' commandment about not worrying in a situation where it's almost impossible not to worry. And also, you'll see on your left, there was a guy who used to kind of busk paint outside St. George's Tron. Everyone knew him as Casper. That wasn't his real name. I'm very, very pleased to say lots of people were curious about Fiona when I painted her, because she obviously looked so ill. She is doing 100% fine, and recently got a lovely haircut. Her hair at that point was the same as mine now. It's luxuriant and long. Sadly, I can't say that Casper is still with us. He was homeless. He died just a month or two ago. And we were always living with that uncertainty. And people were curious about these folks, and people continued to be curious about the people that I painted. I got the opportunity a couple of years ago to do some paintings for an organisation called the Royal Society of Edinburgh. They've got this history of portraits in their building stretching back to Sir Walter Scott, and all members of the society throughout history. I got to paint 5 folks, and they were all from refugee backgrounds and all members of the society. The lady on the left there, Deborah Kayembe, she said out loud what I kind of knew in the back of my head. She said to me, "I will be the first black face on those walls," and it was quite remarkable. Not only was she the first person of colour to be hung amongst all these other portraits, I painted 2 women, and that actually trebled the number of portraits that the Royal Society of Edinburgh had. It's really interesting for me, for such a historic organisation, to be helping point the way forward in society. That's some projects that I've done in the past, and I've found that it really does raise people's curiosity. I'm now thinking about climate justice. A couple of years ago, I contacted Sally Foster Fulton, who's the head of Christian Aid Scotland. At the time, I think it was in 2017, or was it 2018? The Church of Scotland had, at the General Assembly, chosen not to divest from fossil fuels. And a lot of people were not very happy about that. And I texted Sally at the time, who I knew was not comfortable with the decision that the Church of Scotland had reached at the Assembly. And I said, why don't we do something about this? Why don't we do some artwork that's kind of like a protest? So this was a painting as a pilot, if you like, of what I was proposing. Some of you will be familiar with Henry Raeburn's painting, which is most commonly known as the Skating Minister, which has a Church of Scotland minister skating. He's got his top hat and tails on. It's quite some time ago, and we decided to have a couple of young climate activists who would be skating with the Scottish Parliament there in the background. And recently been working on a much larger scale version of that. On Climate Sunday at Glasgow Cathedral, I was working on this painting here. And it's actually, some of you might have noticed it's behind me just now. and that'll be finished in due course, and there are other plans for that. We got a whole bunch of folks who were at the cathedral, politicians, representatives from different denominations, who all signed the back of the painting. We entitled it "Get Your Skates On." We're trying to capture people's imagination and get them to commit that they will do their utmost to pursue climate justice that will really accelerate things. And it's been interesting over the past couple of days that the least likely politicians are talking about accelerating some of what we're doing towards climate justice. Just now, I'm working on these 3 paintings. As you can see, they're sketched out. The backgrounds and the figures, I've got some colour on those, but still have the paint to be applied to the portraits there. We've got 3 people. These 3 paintings are a project I'm working on with Christian Aid, Islamic Relief and Tearfund all together. And these 3 people are from the poorest parts of the world. One from Bangladesh, one from Malawi, one from Nepal, and they're parts of the world that are most affected by climate change. I'm very pleased to say that these 3 paintings from October the 11th to the 25th will be at Kelvingrove Museum and Art Gallery, which is kind of exciting for me, having some paintings in there. And in the middle of the COP26 fortnight, you'll also see them featured on Songs of Praise on BBC, which is great that we're getting some attention for that. If you happen over the October week or the week after that to be in the West End of Glasgow and you'd like to pop along to Kelvingrove there, why don't you pop in and see the paintings? If you're the kind of person that does a little bit on social media, feel free to take a wee selfie with those paintings and let people know all about it. I see that I have just run over 10 minutes time, so I will pause there and let some other people speak.
Thanks so much, Ian. We'll all be getting ready for our selfies at Kelvingrove next month. And next we've got David.
Okay, thank you. I'm all being well, I shouldn't run over time because I'm going to go straight to the sort of medium I work in, which is by and large pre-recorded video. Here goes. Share screen. Art, poetry, and storytelling, which shift hearts and thereby also minds far more effectively than facts and figures do, are the most sophisticated technology we possess for dealing with reality.
Order! Inferiors down there, the better sort of people up here. Near me, where the chairs are cozy and the air conditioning is on. When the world heats up, it's cool to be cool, don't you know? Not like some sweaty labourer from the factory. Of course, I'm here to serve humanity. That has to be my absolute priority over any of the lower creatures. After all, they're only here to serve us. Rather like the lower orders, really. Though I suppose I have to call them people.
As I went home on Monday night,
I came into Christian ministry, and indeed into Christianity via the route of digital graphics. Way back when I was dreaming of life as a puppet animator and getting some but not enough encouragement from the broadcast industries, my parents' minister visiting our house said of what I was doing in my mid-20s, he could use that to preach the gospel. And I remember feeling quite annoyed at that comment, though I wasn't quite sure why. I think in retrospect, Murdoch Mackenzie was a channel of the Holy Spirit, recognising a calling before I did. though it got me into lots of trouble at college too. As it happened, the family church connection meant that I ended up as a communications volunteer for Cars Lane Church in central Birmingham, handling graphics and desktop publishing for the higher profile events of that church, where I also encountered the Iona community, for whom I've supplied hundreds of reflective images as well as video over the past 20 years. I also write prayers, poems, liturgy, songs. Words are a medium too, though they're not the only medium, more like a single line in a symphony score. And if you've ever seen a Welsh Valley preacher in full flow, supported by the deep dark hymns of the language of heaven, you'll know the difference between immersion and minimalism. Lockdown has taken all this into overdrive. Lacking the eye contact in church, I'm putting at least as much energy into a 10-minute video where every second of attention counts as into a full weekend visit to a local church. A recorded prayer is still a prayer when it's recorded with sincerity and integrity. We live in an audio-visual world, and our modes of change of mind and discernment are robustly experiential and multimedia. Who sings, prays twice, you can add who films, edits, uploads, multiplies prayer. And facts and figures without that experiential grounding will flow past like water off a duck's back. What story do they tell? We learn, and even more importantly, we reach the point of changing direction by experience. It's a truly satanic deception to shame and blame human beings for having hearts as well as heads, or to pass off the playful, childlike ways in which mature people can process ideas as the childishness we put behind us, like Paul in that supremely creative passage from 1 Corinthians 13. That's why I want to encourage the folk in our congregations to fall in love with fellow creatures. We won't care for them if we continue to reduce them to objects or discount their languages, their feelings, their rights to life and happiness. Face to face with a puffin, it's difficult not to be overcome with an ecstatic sense of delight that I can only identify as something sacred. Not just what we receive through a screen, but the sights and sounds and smells and feel of our environment, which we can't always bring physically into the places where we meet, nor can everyone gather on the top of a Munro. But we can share the difference that it makes to have taken Scripture out of the comfort zone into a place which reminds us we do not control creation. Or we fall, and with us everything we depend on. Of course, that can all be manipulated, either with good or bad intent, so I prefer the honesty of being upfront about slants, biases and agendas. Is this a waste land? What I creatively present is biased and opinionated, but not actually misleading, and therefore likely to convey something of value. God, after all, has a preferential option for the poor. And allied to that, because both today and emphatically in the pages of Scripture, you can't separate poverty, human injustice, and their impact on the environment, God has a heart for creation. Creation who, not just which, is a major prophetic voice all the way through the Bible and in our lives today. Shut out the earth and their creatures, and you're doing something rather like what male, Western, white, privileged, entitled theologians always have. Creation groans, longing for God's people to get their act together. The stones shout, the trees clap hands, and when I'm trying to make some sort of point about your unity, dependence, and responsibility to our fellow stakeholders in God's rainbow covenant, no creative or technical holds are barred. And as for location, what I used to think of as a backdrop is a colleague, a co-preacher, whatever else I'm saying, location preaches too. And lockdown has got me out and about even when I was limited to cycling distance from where I live. I know that from one point of view, digital communications are entirely artificial. And that's why, especially when grounded in a location, Nothing is off limits in terms of effects, techniques, and digital storytelling, using that visual grammar that's become second nature to human beings for the last several generations. Don't be afraid to let creation talk the talk.
And the earth, a pile of rock and mud. What is it good for but to be trampled and trodden on? Just like you filthy, ragged people down there. The world belongs to God, you said. Strange that. I thought my clients had bought it all up years ago. After all, it's not the end of the world, is it? Why do you want to change things when I'm doing so well?
Okay, who's next?
Thanks, David. So we're on to Anna now, please.
Hi, right, I'm going to start screen sharing as well. See, that should share, and then if I go, yay. Okay, so I really liked the description of me on the kind of social media promo for this event, which was activist, theologian, knitter. Yes, those should be on my epitaph or something. Kind of the three things that I am, and I'm going to start off. Perhaps it might feel like in a kind of slightly strange place to start. But I'm going to start off with thinking about my mental health as a teenager, and about 20 years, pretty much 20 years ago, that I started knitting as a hobby. And about 10 years ago, I was reflecting on this and I wrote these words that I found that learning to knit, becoming somebody who made things, was a way in which the world became re-enchanted for me, as well as being something that was comforting and distracting and giving me a sense of purpose. It was this sense of engagement and enjoyment and enchantment that came about through making things, through starting off with a bit of yarn and ending up with a scarf, that I've kind of found myself really connecting with the world in a way that I hadn't before. As somebody that lived with depression for, even by that age, I'd been living with depression for a long time. And about this about 10-11 years ago, the History of the World in 100 Objects series, Rowan Williams was speaking about this sculpture made in the Ice Age of swimming reindeer. And there's something that he said about this that really struck me, which was that when you see art like this, in which people are representing animals, but also seeing people creating art at all, you see them showing this desire to get inside and to be at home in the world at a deeper level, and that's actually a very religious, or we could say theological or spiritual impulse, to be at home in the world. And again, going back to the issues of my mental health, this was really significant for me, realizing that being somebody who made things, somebody who specifically knitted, I also spin and dye as well, and crochet. I hadn't wanted to actually live in many ways. The world wasn't somewhere that I felt at home. But when I became somebody who made things, I found myself more attuned to the beauty of the world and more able to value beauty for its own sake. And that, as well as my mental health, that kind of actually was a contrast with the kind of Christianity that my background is. So rather than thinking about looking beyond the world, it seemed to become important to be at home in the world. And a few years ago, I started dyeing as well, with natural dyes, with plants. And it was really great to hear Kathy's words about intimacy with ants. And I found that there's something, not only when you are making things that represent the natural world in some way. So for me, often I would knit things that do connect. I feel like they would connect me with nature in some way. So that the scarf that there was a picture of before, which I'm actually wearing. So that was obviously one in which I was trying to represent this sense of the green of May. But then I started actually dyeing with nature as well, making things with nature and starting to see, and it became this co-creator with me. And the plants aren't just stuff that you're necessarily taking and using, but they're also something that you have to kind of know more intimately, and you have to pay attention. At that time, I didn't have a garden. I was living in the West End of Glasgow in a tenement flat. As it was foraging, that was my was the way that I got these materials, and it involved me not only paying a lot more attention to kind of how different dyes and how they work and the colors they yield, but also just paying attention and seeing what was around me. So in the picture in the pot there, that's pineapple weed, which you can get this lovely yellow from, but you'll have that under your feet all the time. It grows in urban spaces. And so again, it was having this more intimate relation with the world around me, with the natural world, through making things. And then I was doing more, so I was doing lots of needle felting, and I was using it, doing it with fibers that I had, that I dyed myself. And I kind of set myself a limit, as I was only going to make things that represented an other than human person, to kind of use Graham Harvey's term, to explain the kind of more animistic worldview about in which it's not only humans that are people, but actually the world is full of persons, and only some of them are human. And so it was things like the barn owls, and as you see there, the great tit and the redwing, so creatures that I would have these encounters with, and those were the ones that I would make. I would try not to make things that were representing something that I didn't have some kind of connection with. So it became this way of really celebrating and showing a love and care for a natural world, that at the same time I was very much deeply grieving. At the time I was doing this, or I started doing this about 5-6 years ago, and I was very intensely aware of the ecological crisis, and of the nature crisis, and in the background to that, I suppose, the climate crisis. So it's kind of activism in a very implicit way, but I've also used my craft for more explicit activism. So I had this project called Knit Wild, which I did with the Children's Wood on North Kelvin Meadow, in the West End of Glasgow, which was an area of land that the local community were using for children to spend time in, and for adults to grow food and to walk their dogs and to be together. And the council wanted to sell it for flats. And so as part of that kind of general campaign, I was doing a yarn bombing campaign in which we were making things, and again, I was representing nature, so daffodils, bees, pumpkins, and also showing children how to make things as well. So we did lots of weaving and things like that, and using that as a kind of a way of making a statement. So a big thing with yarn bombing or guerrilla knitting or other terms you might have heard from it kind of gets people to pay attention. And to think differently, and it makes maybe the urban environment feel more cozy, and it's been used quite a lot in campaigning. And I did similarly, and I ended up using quite a lot of these kind of things that I'd made in those times for this project that I did with Extinction Rebellion Scotland a couple of years ago, in which we made a banner that was made up out of knitted squares, which the different colours were to represent the land, the sky, and the sea. And then we were using the leaves and the fruit and the bees to make up the extinction symbol of the symbol of the hourglass within a world, within the shape of the globe. And hopefully that is something that will be able to be taken out on protests and things now. So, but the great thing about this kind of activism, which I think Shona alluded to it in the introduction, is that it's something that people can do from home, and that people can do even if they're not able to make it to protests, or if for whatever reason that that more and direct kind of action isn't accessible to them, that this is a way of being involved. And it's about, I think, really putting your time and your focus and your attention into what you're making. Just it can lead to you having a kind of a sense of a closer relationship with the cause that you're advocating for. So I was doing this when I was with Extinction Rebellion Scotland, and I know now that there's something similar, but on a massive scale, called Stitches for Survival, that's being organised, in which they're making a 1.5 mile long scarf, that 1.5 to represent the 1.5 degrees of global warming that they're wanting to limit. That the Paris Agreement and that the COP26 negotiations are ostensibly all about. But one thing I should say is that when I was most involved with Extinction Rebellion, when I was doing most of my climate activism, like a lot of people, I got into doing climate activism, direct action after the IPCC report in 2018, and I was really heavily in 2019, and there's a picture of me there wearing a hand knitted woolly hat, dyed with indigo, about to get arrested. I found it very difficult to care at these points about making things about my crafts. I think, you know, my kind of needle felt pictures, I didn't do any for a good year, and it was something that I kind of got cut off from. It didn't seem as important anymore. And although this was a shame, and I wish that I had found a way to keep that practice going as something that connects me to the wider world, and connects me to a sense of gratitude and the kind of the reasons why we do what we do. I also think that so Sarah Corbett thinks about the idea of craftivism and doing activism through craft, and she talks about it being gentle kind of activism that you that can be good, doing things like avoiding burnout and getting distracted from the things that you care about, like what happened to me. But I think it's also worth saying that there is really I think there's a place for gentle activism, but there's also a place for a less gentle form of prophetic activism, and for, as well as kind of trying to convince world leaders through giving them, you know, 1.5 mile scarves or handkerchiefs saying "don't blow it" written on them when they become MPs. I think sometimes we also do have to connect, you know, to give voice to things that are not gentle, and to speak truth to power. And it's really important to use our craft and our creativity to do that as well. I'm a bit worried about how I'm doing the time, but this is my last slide. So during the COVID crisis, I made this cardigan, and it took a long time, and it was a really difficult time. I was burnt out from doing lots of different kinds of activism, and I knitted the cardigan, which took forever, and I had to change my needles partway through because during COVID I've become more tense, and I was knitting more tightly, and it's made with yarn that I've dyed with plants from my garden. And I realized that another important thing about knitting, that in the face of the climate crisis, which is, as I think, you know, David talked about so, you know, so creatively and so powerfully, it's such a huge and terrible issue that we cannot just smooth over by making nice knitted cozy things that make us feel good, or by having nice walks in nature. But what I have found is that through making things, it's a way of expressing the hope for the future and care for the future, and there's as well as enabling me to kind of cope with the situations of the present. And there's a really lovely quote which is often attributed to Martin Luther, but I don't think he actually said it, but anyway, which is that if the world were to end tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree. And I think things like, for me, doing things like making a cardigan that takes a really long time because it's on tiny little needles is a kind of planting of an apple tree. It's of saying this world is still something that I'm at home in, and that I'm committed to, and I'm still going to work for. Right, that's me. Sorry if that was too long. I can't see my clock.
No, thank you so much, Anna, for sharing. That was great. And we come to our last contributor now. So just a reminder to everyone to get your questions in or your comments. And I will now hand over to Linda.
Hi, can you see me? Yes, good. So yes, I'm Linda Murgatroyd. So I'm a Quaker, and one of the things that we do in our Quaker worship is to open our minds to let go and to open our minds with it in a sense of expectant listening. And when there's a problem that comes to a meeting, it's amazing how people will say things, or things will happen that kind of change the nature of that, and we see something new. I've always had great difficulty in focusing prayerfully, mindfully, in having quiet times on my own, not doing anything. I tried very hard, different disciplines and so on. And I found in the end that what really works for me is to be making. I can take a couple of crayons and scribble, or I might scribble some words down while I'm holding whatever it is that's concerning me in my mind. It's a way of staying with the trouble. And what's interesting is that very often I look at what I've made and I'm surprised by it, and I may not see straight away, but if I come back to it, it leads a clue to where the next step's going, where God might be leading me. So it holds a space, and it if it's a big problem, I can come back to it, and it's a bit like an icon that only I can sort of see, and it hasn't got symbolism from anyone else, but it holds a space towards God, towards the next step, towards the problem. So when I was getting very anxious about the climate, and I've been doing all sorts of different things and going on demos and talking to people and reading about it and worrying about it, eventually it twigged that this is what I needed to do. And it's also big, so I thought, well, I'll start with one thing. And I developed some questions, which I'm going to try and screen share with you. Now, if that's working, I hope that's working. And I've developed these questions for myself, and then I found they worked for other people, because I've been running sort of creative workshops for all sorts of different groups, spiritual traditions and not. So the questions, just holding in my mind, you might like to just close your eyes for a moment and just very briefly and think of something you love. It could be a person, a place, an activity, a creature, and imagine what would be happening to it, just to that thing in the coming, in 20 years time, 30 years time, given what you know about what's going to be happening. I mean, in Glasgow is very close to the sea, so I guess flooding is an obvious possibility. And then working out, well, how are you connected to that problem? How are you being part of that threat? You know, what are you doing that's making that happen? And then, of course, if you can work that out, you can think about something that you can do about it. And it may not be very big, and there may be so many ways in which you're connected, but actually finding one thing you can do, and then starting to do it, even if it's tiny. First of all, it's making a difference. It's changing yourself. And then secondly, there's something else you can do. And it also makes you less anxious. And then someone might ask you, well, why are you doing that? Why are you not eating meat? Or, oh, you've got a bike. And then you can talk about the issue and make connections. And making connections is something that's come up in many of our conversations here. And it's in any kind of spiritual practice, whether it's Christian or Buddhist or whatever. It makes us aware, doing this makes us aware that we're part of something bigger, and we're part of not only a community, but an ecosystem, and something even bigger than that, a mystery. So this is what I did, and I thought, well, we were having an exhibition of art about sustainability and the environment, and I thought, well, let's see if this can be useful for other people, and if lots of people, well, if people can make something very small that altogether is connecting us up together, and which they can send in the post. They can use materials that are they've got to hand and are cheap and so forth. So I hit on making textile square about 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, about a foot square. And this is oops, sorry, I've gone back. Technology has defeated me again. So go back. Sorry. So people made these squares out of whatever they had to hand. Most people have made squares which are, no, it's not working, sorry. View Navigator, and I'll go back to that one. There we go. Most people have made squares out of materials they already had. The first time I did this image, I had this image of the world in my hands, that's kind of trying to do something. But first did it with a group of people. I was preparing my materials and I realized it was all plastic. So one of the things, the thing I decided to do out of that is not to buy any more plastic pens. And it was quite interesting because plastic is so useful and it's very accessible, but there's just so many other things that we can do with it. And I kind of was thinking about all the ways in which, this is what, 3 years ago now. Of course, plastic is something that's been very big now. Not by used plastic straws. We're at your point. We were just beginning to see the oils. It's really very, very widely. From things that they love, so it might be birds, to their actions. Responding to those questions, people on it at lots of different levels. So this has knitted, wrapping up. One of the things that we have, and the things that they made, all the things they have to write a little thing to need, a little text to accompany the image, and it includes something that they're doing about it. So this person was worried about climate change, and she's turned around and making more, wrapping up more. This person concerned about her grandchildren. Those are the people that she was thinking of in the meditation. She's made a portrait. She's made 3 pairs, each with portrait of her grandchildren. They're amazing. And so her action was to think, when she had a choice about a little treat, what impact of that treat might be. This person has trees in her garden and is planting more trees wherever she can. Person was worried about the sea and trade, out of coffee was coming across the ocean, and then looking in the cupboard at home where all the clothes in the family had come from, and they're going to buy things from far on the food they buy, on the clothes they buy, and on how they travel as well. Some of the things they portrayed are much harder to deal with, and this one is from Uganda, and it's about wildlife park that's in near community. The wildlife are being preserved, many of them were approaching extinction, but that preservation doesn't have access to the space anymore, and that was part of what they were living off. And then there are all the issues about the money from that coming from eco-tourists who are flying there. So simple. They're holding the spaces and have embroidered threatening. So people can engage with it in a way that the big question is much too difficult to engage with. So if you're doing a bit of embroidery, as I'm sure, or knitting, as I'm sure Anna will say, people will ask you, what are you knitting? And you have all sorts of questions and communications after that. Of course, you may want to say why you're doing it. So, you know, these people were on the school strikes. We've got some others about Extinction Rebellion, and it made them do that. And that then leads to some interesting opportunities to explain, really, and to inspire people. So cut her carbon footprint. And the people seeing these, when we have exhibitions, are really interested in that. They're quite surprised. And the part of the idea of this particular project, as it's developed with a number of different people, it's been led by Quakers, but all sorts of groups of people are coming along, is to kind of build bridges between those of us that are very active and concerned and speaking and doing what we can and worrying, and those that have perhaps had their head in the sand, or perhaps think, well, if I don't buy plastic straws, that's going to save the world. It's okay to not buy plastic straws, but what's the next step? And we've had some very interesting conversations without judgment about all this. Oh dear, my internet's unstable. There we go. One of the important things is the love ingredient, because fear alone isn't going to make us change. If you think of all the sacrifices that have been made, that can motivate us to extraordinary things. And of course, under COVID, we've seen that we can make changes. We need to make really the electorate changes, unless the communities want change. So one of the things we're trying to do now is to take this out more widely, to spread it. We've got 2 or 3 exhibitions up already. There's one in the Maritime Museum in Dumbarton about to open. There'll be a little one in Glasgow, Quaker Meeting House, during COP, and a few discussions. Like tomorrow night, we're having a discussion from the Meeting House on Zoom, where people are going to use these images. Experts in different fields are choosing 1 or 2 images to talk about the issue. And we can talk about all the different ways in which we can do something about it, the different levels, from the personal to the community to the international politics, and the economic sphere. So trying to break down those boundaries between the huge and the very little is really, really important. And taking specific actions, and some of the specific actions people have taken. Talking to my family. This is a granny, a grandmother, I guess about sort of my age, whose children were working all hours and never had time to spend with their children. She was doing a lot of childcare, and then they spent a lot of time traveling. As soon as they had time off, they would go traveling, and that was expensive. And the children were very anxious about the climate, and she was very anxious about the climate. But the parents were so focused on the here and now. So talking about it was actually really, really dangerous. It felt really dangerous to her. Some of these conversations are really difficult. People are doing things like gardening and building more insect-friendly gardens, planting trees and so on. But they're also changing their farming practices. And moving house. Somebody was thinking of moving house, and she has actually moved. It's helped her to decide to move to something that would give her a much lower carbon footprint, because she wouldn't need a car, and if she was going to insulate everything and this sort of thing. It just helped her focus. This is something she can do. Buying choices, making little choices in everyday life. I was amazed the other day. I'm mostly vegetarian, but I cook for my father who can't eat many vegetables. And when I was buying some fish in a supermarket and it said certified, caught in the North Atlantic. And when I got home, I realized it had been shipped all the way to China and packed and then shipped all the way back here. So what's the carbon footprint of that fish, let alone the sustainability of the fish? I saw this film out, was it Seaspiracy, which or Seaspiracy, I don't know quite know how you pronounce it, which was on the internet, which was saying that the Marine Conservation Society, whatever it is, actually is not independent. It's all funded by the people that buy the fish, and there's no independent certification. So who knows? Some people have you know, didn't know what to do, and one of the things that we've been doing is actually having conversations on Zoom during lockdown. Once a month we had to help people with the textile things initially, but more and more it was talking about, what should I do about this? And I've done this, isn't that great? And somebody else said, yeah, and you could the other thing. So there was one lady worried about a countryside and worried about what she made this beautiful image, and then started talked about it to anyone else. So she never, people encouraged her to write to the local council because there was a planning application and the conditions, and she's about that, and she's doing that now. So it's a process. These are all steps on a journey, and we've all got possible journeys we can take. But we're hoping that this and we've got a panel now. We're going making next. They're all on display somewhere in the country now, around Britain. We're looking for a few more spaces in Glasgow, maybe foyers or churches where they could be displayed during COP. So get in touch with the Loving Object if you've got some. And you're very welcome to use, we've got on our website, we've got meditations and sort of lots of guidance, as well as images of panels and the texts, so you can provide it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing. So we'll move now on to any questions that anyone has for our contributors this evening.
I can't believe for a minute that people are shy. Feel free to write your oh.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
if
please.
Linda could put up slide number 2 again, I thought that was very interesting.
Oh.
Of my presentation.
Slide number 2. Is Linda still here? I know she was having difficulty with her sound in her video.
I know,
there.
yes, exactly.
We can maybe get that sent out to everyone. Is that possible?
Ah, that'd be good, yes, that'd be good, yes.
Yeah,
Great,
we'll send
yes.
it out to you. Thank
Very
you.
good, yes. Good.
Sorry, I just got cut off. I don't know if I missed any.
No, somebody was just asking about your slides there, Linda, but we've said that we can get that sent to everyone because they really appreciated your slides. So
okay, thank you. Well, there you can see all the images on our website. I'll put it in the chat.
great, thanks, Linda.
Lauren, have you got any other questions come through?
Not at the moment, but I'm
No.
just scanning the chat to see if there are any.
I might suggest we could think about the things that the different speakers had in common, which is quite interesting. about how there's a very communal aspect which links us together with creation in pretty well everybody's experience.
Yeah, I mean, if people don't have questions, if they've got comments or thoughts that they'd maybe like to put in the chat box or say aloud, then please do. A lot of people really appreciate the variety as well that you all five of you brought, and how you get creative and ways of expressing how you feel about the climate crisis, and ways of being an activist in that kind of creative space. So
There are a couple of questions coming in, Shauna. So the first one is just about will links to websites or social media be shared for the panelists?
yes, I think, is that something that will also go out in the email afterwards, I believe?
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the panelists have been putting things in the chat, but in case you do miss them, we can make sure they're sent to everyone afterwards so that you've got them. I think, there's a question for you here, Ian. It says that you showed a couple of paintings that are linked to other paintings like Last Supper and a Skating Minister. How do you decide which images, elements or symbols from the inspiration painting will be brought into your expression of the theme, and how do you make them your own?
That's a really great question. When it came to, when I was thinking about that Skating Minister painting, that came to mind specifically because I was trying to think of something that could connect, first of all, with the Church of Scotland, and with the historic connection with the Raeburn painting. That really came to mind, and it's such a well-known painting in Scotland. You know, the Scottish National Gallery have got it in postcards and tea towels and all sorts. The second part of that question, it answers how I approach any of the paintings that I've got a connection with a historical one. There's inspiration that will come from a historic painting, but when I'm working with the models that are in front of me, there's something that I always want to draw out from the relationship in the moment with the models when I meet them, and there's something that you can just never make up or pretend about when you're meeting an individual person. When it came to that Last Supper painting, that I was really it was really depending on who was there at the time, and how could we arrange people without it being too contrived, what would reflect the reality of those people in that situation, but what could still convey something to the people that I'm trying to connect with.
Great, thank you, Ian. And we've got a question now that is actually for each of the contributors. So maybe that's a good way to conclude by having each answer this question from Janet. And it is, as a group of really creative people, what can those of us who feel awed by your creativity do? How can they maybe get involved and do some of these things? So I'll go first to Kathy, if that's okay.
Well, I think that, there's a clue in the word that says practice. You just do things over and over and over and over again. And I think, you don't ever start out thinking you can do this. You just do it anyway. And I think that in a way that's a bit like activism. You have to stop worrying about what other people do. And, the fact that you can't control everything in the world, or even anything very much, and just do what you can do. And I mean, you know, people can be creative in gardens and gardening. I mean, I think my little patch of vegetable growing in my back court is probably as important as my writing. And you know, and there are so many ways in which people can engage. And I think, you know, the thing is to do it because it's good to do, not because of any, you know, because it's doing things that are good to do that also re-engages you with, you know, the goodness of life and other people and so on. So just lots of practice.
Thanks, Kathy. And Ian, what's your thoughts on that?
That was a question that we get asked a lot when I was working at St George's Tron. People really liked the project and wondered what they could do in their own context. I'm just going to click that there. There was lots of things that church couldn't do. It didn't have connections with hospitals. It didn't have connections with schools. It wasn't a traditional parish church. So they were doing the things that they could do and doing the things that we had the ability to make people curious in that context. It's the busiest street in Scotland, so opening up a cafe worked. That's not going to work if you're in a suburb somewhere. You're not going to have the people walking past, but there's going to be other things that you'll be aware of in your community that you can connect with people with. What's going to make those people in your location curious? Wherever you are, you guys will be the experts on your people.
Great, thank you, Ian. And David, what's your thoughts?
Right, well, you just said all the good stuff. I think what I'd build on from what Kathy said is that whatever we're doing, and particularly in regard to the climate crisis, that basic recognition that we are not in charge is quite liberating. You are there to do whatever you can do. You might actually find something you yourself do which you're in awe of, and that would be a good thing. I'm thinking back perhaps as a friend of ours in the Iona community, Peter Miller, who has got away with writing books and things. But I remember him saying very vigorously, he likes the books he writes, whether anybody else does or not. And, you know, whatever you do, especially in regard to activism and things to do with climate change, do something you enjoy, because then you'll carry on doing it and possibly you'll actually make other people happy as well.
Great. And Anna, have you got any?
Yeah, I think what I found quite liberating about doing knitting in particular was that it's not something that has a great deal of ego attached to it for a lot of people. Like, it's often thought of as, oh, it's just knitting, or it's just a pattern, and it can be something that you don't actually have to feel creative to do, but you are creating, and I think that having that kind of craft practice makes you think differently about what creativity is. And I think we've got very stuck with this kind of in our culture, in the kind of Western culture of thinking of creativity as something that comes from geniuses who are normally men on their own in a garret somewhere with somebody else doing the cooking and enabling them to survive. And actually the thing with a lot of crafts and a lot of these wonderful things, I was just so great to see Linda's examples of stitching and things that are often done throughout everyday life. And it can just be having this wee moment of, oh, I'm going to make something. And often making is about transformation rather than creating something from nothing. And that, again, I suppose it's another problem of our Christian culture, is that sense of the understanding of God creating from something from nothing. Or is that actually, if you look, you can read the biblical materials differently, that in a way there was something and it was shaped and formed, and that can be a way of thinking about it as well. So, and I think, so just to repeat what everyone else says as well, like, don't worry about it, but there's also big reasons, like culturally, why we do worry about it, and a lot of it is unlearning them as well.
Thanks, Anna. And just as we're talking about transforming things, Elizabeth, I believe, is baking right now for Christian Aid. So, you know, she's turning things into a cake. So that's another way of getting creative. And Linda, do you have anything to add as well on that?
Yeah, I think well, don't think about making art, but perhaps being used, being part of the ongoing creation. We're doing something and being aware that you're doing something, I think is helpful. So whether, you know, if it's knitting or baking or weeding or stitching or writing, just doing something, whatever our choices are, it's either doing something or it's doing nothing. And so it changes us, the process of doing it changes us. And if we're aware of that process and allow kind of newness to come through us, it can change the world. One of the things that we've all been very creative during the lockdown. We've all changed so many of our habits. We might not think of them as creative. They're not things that are going to go in art galleries or be published in volumes of poetry, but we've learned to use what we have and to think about how we can use that differently in different circumstances. And I think that's the kind of creativity that we need to learn to do much better, to make a sustainable world, to experiment and to see which experiments are working, and to see where the Spirit's leading us individually and together, and to be aware of some of the things that happen as a result of our making or of our not making. If we do nothing, nothing's going to change. So do something. And learn more about it as you get on.
Great, thank you so much, Linda. And I will now pass over to Leanne just to conclude our evening.
Folks, thank you so much for coming. This has been a glorious night of interesting and wonderful conversation. I actually can't wait to watch the video back again because it was so beautiful. If you are prompted to do something as a result of this and through your creative practice, you let us know. Let us know if you make something. I'd love to see if you make something on the back of this. Look out for our creative contributions to COP. There'll be lots of art and writing and bits and pieces for you to look out for. So keep an eye on our socials for that. And to find out more campaign materials, I've put a little link in the chat, and you can find out how you can campaign for Christian Aid and for climate. Linda, what will happen to the video? I'm gonna think on that overnight, and we'll work out how to best use it. As we leave, let's have a moment to tie tonight together. In this shared time together, the whole world of creativity and campaigning has revealed itself to us. We have reheard the power of the written word. We have brought back into view, through portraits and painting, those who are often unseen. We have re-recognized creation as our true colleague and our co-preacher. We have knitted ourselves a home in the world, found a connection to a sense of gratitude. We have topped ourselves up with the love ingredient through textiles rather than terror. God, guide our care for the world through your divine creativity. May we see the unseen, say the unsaid. May we actively, creatively share your love to all the earth. And in changing ourselves, may we change the world. Amen. And good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.